boys and girls. Welcome back to Grammie's Book Nook. I'm very happy that you're all here today, and I hope you had a wonderful day. I know that you're studying hard, and I'm very proud of you. So yesterday I told you that we were going to start a book, and it's a chapter book, and the name of it is Andre. And before I start to read the book, I just want to tell you that this book doesn't have a lot of pictures in it. It's mostly a reading book, so it's going to be a great time for you to be using your imaginations as you hear what I'm reading to you. And I also want you to know that some of the parts of the book that I'm going to be reading today are a little bit sad. And this story is about a real family and a real event. And when we're going through life with our family and with our friends, there are going to be some times where we're going to have to deal with sadness. So I want you to know that the whole book isn't sad, just the first part of the book. So, is everybody ready to start learning about this very unusual family and their pet seal, Andre? I'm ready to start reading. But first, you know, I need to put on my Grammie spectacles. So, chapter 1 is called The Goodridge Family. My name is Tony, and I'm 7 years old. That day in May, when the baby harbor seal came to live at my family, I was only 7 years old. But I remember it so very well. Andre grew up and became as famous as Smokey the Bear. But Andre was a real. He wasn't something that somebody made up. And his story is a true story. My father, Harry, is a tree surgeon, but he's also a scuba diver. He used to spend many hours swimming underwater. Diving deep down in the dark, cold waters of Maine is very lonely, and it can be dangerous at times, too. For years, he'd been thinking that a harbor seal would make an excellent diving companion. I thought this was a wonderful idea, and my brothers and sisters did, too. There are 5 of us. The oldest are twins, and their names are Steve and Sue. Then came Carol and Paula, and then finally me. Being the baby of the family wasn't always easy. My brothers and sisters were usually too busy with their own affairs to find time for me. I guess that was the reason I learned to talk to birds. I found birds understanding and very sensible. My mother, Felice, was understanding and sensible too, but she wasn't all that sure that adding a baby seal to the family was a great idea, because we already had a house full of pets. Finally, she decided that having one more wouldn't really make all that much difference, as long as she didn't have to clean up after it. We had the usual frogs, snakes, and pet mice. We even had ants. Steve, who was planning to be an engineer, liked to capture dragonflies and load them down with ants just to see how many ants a dragonfly could fly off with. When Paula was little, she would put diapers on our chickens and push them around in her baby carriage. If the neighbors thought that we were a bit odd, we thought it was perfectly natural to have birds and animals for playmates. I had a pet rooster, and his name was Jake. He was a fat rooster, and I also had a very fussy hen that I named Mrs. Cluck Cluck. When they had been going together for years, I thought it was time that they should get married. So, I dressed Mrs. Cluck Cluck in a white wedding gown with a hole cut out in the train for her tail feathers. The wedding was held down by the duck pond. Our pigeon, whose name was Walter, was the best man. Walter spent all his time around the pond with the ducks. Maybe he thought he was a duck too. Then there was a flying squirrel. His name was Charlie. He lived somewhere in our house, but we never did find out where. He would come gliding out each night at dusk and join us for supper. And he loved bananas. Reuben was our cock robin. He fell out of his nest one day, and Steve brought him home. Reuben could never get enough to eat. We would spend hours collecting and feeding him worms until it seemed like he would burst. But he still wanted more worms. He loved splashing in water, and whenever I took a bath, he would fly in and sit on the edge of the tub. My mother couldn't wash dishes without Reuben getting in her way. One night, when he fell into the soapy water, he looked a sorry sight. There was also a one-legged seagull my father called Sam Seagull. A friend, finding him wounded at the landfill, had brought him to us to care for. Everyone brought us wounded wild animals and birds. Like Mother, they didn't think that having one more would make any difference. Sounds like quite the little menagerie they have going on. We had a dog, of course, a fat, lazy beagle named Toot, and a pet rabbit named Bugs. And Toot didn't know that beagles were supposed to chase rabbits. Bugs would point this out to Toot. When Bugs got bored, which was often, he would nudge Toot out of a snooze on the lawn, and Toot would finally get up and give Bugs a chase around the house, and then he would go back to sleep again. Toot was a great help with Beulah, my pet guinea pig. Beulah wasn't very bright. She'd wander off and get lost. And when I'd find her gone, I'd call to Toot and I'd say, "Toot, go find Beulah." And she was very obedient. She would track her down with his nose, and send my little guinea pig scrambling to the safety of her pen. And I had a horse, and his name was Tiffany. On fine summer days, we'd go off together into the woods and fields and look for the tallest grass for Tiffany to eat. She loved that. But mostly, I enjoyed luring birds into a little wire pen at the back of my house. I'd scatter birdseed and dried corn along a path and into the pen, and all sorts of birds ate their way into captivity. Of course, I would always free them, because wild birds belong in the air or nesting in trees. One day, Daddy said teasingly, "Those birds you trap can't be very smart. I'd just like to see you catch a really smart bird, like a rudder-tailed gackle." I didn't even know what a rudder-tailed gackle looked like, but later that day, I saw a large black bird with a long tail pecking his way into my wire pen. That afternoon, I showed him to Daddy. "Is this the bird you mean?" After that, he never teased me about my bird collection. But this story is about a seal. For me, the story begins that day in May when Andre arrived from the sea. And I'm sure that was when the story began for Andre too. Chapter 2, The New Arrival. A seal is not a fish. It's a fish-eating mammal that breathes air, and mother seals have glands that provide milk to feed their babies. Seals belong to a group of mammals that enter the sea. Whales and dolphins, for instance, live entirely in the water, but seals and sea otters bear their young on the land and enter the sea to catch food for themselves and their babies. 5 kinds of seal can be seen in Maine waters. but the harbor seal is the only year-round resident. Having their babies, harbor seals spend most of their days on the weed-covered tidal ledges in the bays of Maine. Seal mothers have these babies, they're called pups, in the spring, around the middle of May. It was on a Saturday in mid-May that my father went out into the bay in his boat to find a baby seal. We were all home and waiting when we heard his truck come into the driveway. We rushed to the window, and then Sue yelled, "He's done it! He's got one!" There was Daddy coming up the walk, and peering out from under his slicker was a tiny whiskered head no bigger than a softball. Marching into the kitchen and placing the little creature at our feet, he showed us the seal's glossy black coat, smooth as a grape. I'd never seen anything so beautiful. When we all began chattering at once, Daddy said, "Wait now. Give this little fellow a chance to get used to all you funny-looking people." But the little seal seemed not at all disturbed by all of our fuss. After looking us over one by one, he went bellying around the room, examining every nook and cranny. He was curious as a kitten. While Andre explored his new home, my father told us what had happened. That morning, the sea had been very calm. In his boat, he cruised 5 miles into Penobscot Bay from Rockport, where we live. Eider ducks flashed by, a gull soared in the sky. As my father steered around a weedy ledge, he suddenly saw a tiny head pop up. It was a pup. Couldn't have been any more than 3 days old. Easing the boat closer, my father expected the pup to go under the water, but instead the little head came up out of the water as if to get a better look at this strange man in a boat. The baby seal's mother was nowhere to be seen. That's a surprising thing, because seal mothers are very protective of their pups. Then a curious thing happened. Instead of slipping under the water, the little creature began swimming directly toward the boat. And it was then that Daddy simply took out his net and scooped the baby seal right into the boat. That's what made me think he was an orphan, my father explained. Seal mothers only usually have 1 pup, but occasionally a mother will have 2. But since she doesn't have enough milk to feed 2 babies, one of the babies has to be abandoned to starve to death or to be eaten by a shark. Hearing that made me glad that my father had come along at just the right moment. I didn't want to think about what would have happened to I didn't want to think about what had happened to our other seals. You see, we had 2 others. First we had Marky, and then we had Basil. I like stories with happy endings, but the stories of these 2 both had unhappy endings. Still, it's important to tell what happened to them. I remember overhearing my mother say one day to a neighbor, "Bringing up the first 2 children was the hardest. After that it got easier, because you learn from your mistakes." My father never would have been able to bring up the seal we called Andre if he hadn't learned from the mistakes that he made with Marky and Basil. So, boys and girls, I think we're going to stop here for today, and when we come back the next time, we're going to start with chapter 3 and learn about Marky and Basil. I hope you'll be excited to keep on reading this story with me. It's something I think you're going to enjoy. I'm going to sign off for now, but before I do, I want to make sure that we keep reminding ourselves every day to do what? Several times a day? Wash our hands. And I'm going to start singing our hand washing song, and I want you to sing along. So are you ready? Here we go. Wash those germs away, strong and healthy every day. I make wise choices so I stay strong, gonna wash those germs away. Oh, we wash those germs away, strong and healthy every day. I make wise choices so I stay strong, gonna wash those germs away. I make wise choices in every way, I'm gonna wash those germs away. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day, and I want you to know how very special I think you are and how much I'm looking forward to seeing you again the next time. Bye-bye.